In this tutorial, I'll teach you how to work with layers in your digital art application. It's unusual to find a digital art application that doesn't support layers. Layers offer one of the greatest advantages to making art on a computer because they allow you to separate the overlapping objects in your composition into individual elements which can be manipulated in various ways. For example, you can change the size, position, or color of an object in your painting. You can do a lot with layers, and by using them, you can make your digital painting experience a lot less frustrating. I've opened the snow globe template. This is an example of a painting which uses a lot of layers. The snowman is in a group of layers, and within the snowman group, there is a layer for the nose. I can hide the visibility of the nose to remove it. There are also layers for the scarf, the arms, and so on. I can transform the whole snowman group to move it if I want to experiment with different positions for him. I can even drag the layer in the Layers panel to move objects on the Z-axis, which allows me to put the snowman layers behind the tree layers. Layers give me an incredible amount of flexibility to compose my piece. By using layers, I can freely experiment without having to worry about making mistakes. If you are not happy with a layer, you can correct it or delete it. You don't have to worry about hurting the other elements in your painting that you're satisfied with. Layers are your friend, so don't be afraid to use them. I have layers for everything in this painting: the snow, the tree, the globe, the wrinkles on the scarf. It's not uncommon for me to use 50 or more layers when I'm working on a complex painting. You might not want to deal with as many layers as I use, but it doesn't hurt to at least use a few. You can control many of the layer properties in the Layers panel. This is a very important panel, therefore it's always visible in my workspace. In order to assist me in this exploration of layers, I've enlisted my friend Layers Dude. As you can see, he is made from a bunch of layers. There is a layer for his hair, eyes, mouth, and so on. There are also layers for yellow, blue, and red balls, which we will use throughout these demonstrations. To make it easier to recognize which layer is which, there are names next to each layer with a small thumbnail showing what's on it. As you can see, the thumbnail for the shirt shows a tiny green shirt. You might want to customize the size of these thumbnails if you can. There's usually an option in the panel. In Rebelle, you'll have to change the UI scale preference, but that will affect everything. Once I've labeled each layer, I don't need to rely on the thumbnails, so I'm not concerned about how small they are. I usually just remove the thumbnail so I can see more layers at once. This way I don't have to waste time scrolling through the list of layers whenever I switch between them. The layers in the Layers panel are presented in sort of an overhead view. The bottom of the Layers panel is the background, or the plane that's furthest away from you. And the top of the Layers panel is the plane or the object that's closest to you. If you can imagine, you're standing right in front of Layers Dude. He is in between you and the background. And the colored balls are in between yourself and Layers Dude. If I want to move the blue ball behind Layers Dude, I'll need to select that layer, then use the transform tool to move it about where I want it. And now to move it backward on the Z-axis, I need to drag that layer down in the Layers panel and then release it beneath the body. Now when I move that blue ball around, you can see that it is behind Layers Dude. And if I want to bring it back in front of him, I just drag that layer to the foreground or to the top of the Layers panel. The Transform or Move tools will allow you to rearrange the layers on the X and Y axis. I can select the blue ball and then drag it around. In applications that support it, I can also select multiple layers by holding down Control on my keyboard and clicking in the Layers panel. I'll add the red ball to my selection, and now I can move those two layers together. You can see both layers are selected and highlighted in the Layers panel. I can also constrain the movement of a layer to a horizontal or vertical axis by holding Shift. This can help to keep objects aligned. If your application supports it, the Auto Select Layer feature can be very efficient when it comes to selecting and transforming layers. Depending on the application you are using, there are different ways to enable this. Some applications might show a checkbox for Auto Select Layer in the Properties bar when the Move tool is selected. You might even be able to hold down a shortcut like Control, then click on a layer on the canvas to activate this mode. In Rebelle, you must hold Shift plus Control to activate it. You can see the cursor icon changes. The red ball layer is currently selected in the Layers panel, but if I click on the blue ball directly from the canvas, it automatically selects the blue ball layer in the Layers palette. If I click on the red ball on the canvas, you can see that I'm able to easily switch between these two layers without having to click first in the Layers palette. Selecting a layer this way works great until you create a layer that covers the other layers. I have this tinting layer hidden. I'll show it, and you can see that it's being used to tint the entire canvas. As long as this layer is visible, I'll only be able to select the tint since it covers all of the other layers. So in this case, selecting the layer from the canvas is not going to be very helpful. I'll need to lock the tinting layer to exclude it from being auto-selected, and now I'm able to select the underlying layers. If I want to temporarily hide layers, I can click on the eyeball to make them invisible. I'll hide the tinting layer. I can also hide entire groups if I like. In some applications like Rebelle, you can even drag along the icons to quickly hide and show several layers in a row. If I don't want layers anymore, I can delete them. Once deleted from the Layers panel, those layers are removed from my painting. I can bring deleted layers back as long as I'm able to undo to the point before I had removed them. In many art applications, you can spotlight the visibility of a layer with Alt plus left click. This will hide all of the other layers in your composition, isolating the layer you have selected. This can be useful for making it easier to focus on a specific area of your painting. It can also be useful for locating the contents of a layer that is difficult to see. Alt-clicking again will restore the previous state of visibility for each layer. Usually, when layers are hidden, you will not be able to merge them. You'll need to show those layers first. We'll discuss merging layers in a dedicated reference video. In order to save your layers, you'll need to go to Save As and choose a file format that supports layers, because some formats like PNG and JPEG will discard them and flatten your image into a single layer. When in doubt, just choose your art application's native format. This is usually the first option. Saving is sort of its own topic, so I'll recommend that you watch my reference video about that to learn more. Now that I gave you an overview of what layers can do, let's get hands-on by creating and manipulating some layers. I can create a new layer from the bottom of the Layers panel by clicking on the New Layer button. When I click on this button, that adds a new layer above whichever layer was currently selected. Had I selected a layer within a group first, the new layer would be created within the group. I'll drag that new layer above the face layer, and I'll name it Beard. I'll select Black and choose a fully opaque hard edge brush. Then I'll draw a beard on Layers Dude. Because that beard is on a separate layer, I can show it and hide it, transform it, change the color of it, or delete it. I can change the name of the layer by double-clicking on it. I'll rename it Facial Hair. As far as naming layers, just name them whatever you think is going to help you understand what's on that layer. I can look at the label for the eyes layer and I instantly know what's on it. If I only have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, that makes it very difficult to know what's on your layers, and you'll have to rely on memory or fumble with hiding and showing the layers to sort things out. You will get into situations where you don't know what to name a layer. In that case, just use whatever label works for you. For example, it may suffice to create a label based on the color of the object. And you don't have to use really long labels for your layers, you can feel free to abbreviate. For example, rather than texture, I'll use tex, or instead of background, I'll use BG. I'll delete that beard layer. While layers can be very useful, they can also be difficult to work with if you don't pay careful attention to which layer you're painting on. For example, I might want to add some more hair to Layers Dude. I'll extend his hair over his eyes, but I accidentally painted on the face layer. If I wasn't aware of this, then I'd be in for a surprise later on. If I hide the hair layer, you can see that I've ruined my face layer. If I am fortunate enough to be able to undo to before I added the hair, then I can redraw the hair on the correct layer. If I can't undo, then I have no choice but to repaint the face to fix it and then redraw the hair. In either case, I've just wasted time. This is precisely why it's important to pay careful attention to which layer you're painting on, and labeling your layers helps you keep track of that. Even so, I've been making digital art for a long time, and I've created many paintings. Despite all of that experience, I sometimes accidentally paint on the wrong layer, so don't feel bad because it happens to all of us. Oftentimes, you will have accidentally painted on a blank area of a layer. If that happens, you can easily make a selection of the misplaced pixels and then cut and paste them above the correct layer. Then just merge the two layers together. The best way to prevent painting on the wrong layer is to lock the layers you are not working on. You can do that by clicking on the lock icon. This is located either next to each layer or near the top of the Layers panel. That will add a lock icon next to the layer to indicate it is locked. You may be able to click on that lock icon to unlock the layer, and by clicking in that same spot you can lock it again. If I try to paint on a locked layer, nothing will happen, and a lock icon might appear letting me know the layer is locked and I cannot paint on it. I'll lock all of the layers except the hair layer. Now, even if I accidentally select the face layer, I am unable to paint on it. It can feel tedious to have to lock and unlock layers while you're working, so I prefer to just keep a close eye on the layer I have selected. Hidden layers are usually locked by default, so you won't be able to paint on a hidden layer even if you try. This is helpful for preventing accidental marks on your canvas. Now let's spend some time learning about the canvas layer, sometimes referred to as the background. That's the layer that is always at the bottom of your composition. The name canvas can be a little misleading because you might not be painting on a canvas, you might be painting on paper. And you don't exclusively paint on this layer, you can paint on separate layers. The purpose of the canvas layer is twofold. First, the canvas layer serves to enable or disable background transparency for a composition. I'll hide the background layer and the canvas layer. Now the background of the document will be transparent if I save this in a format that supports transparency. The advantage to working with a transparent background is that I can print this or place it into another composition without including a background color. I have a reference video that will teach you how to do that. If I make Layer Dude's shirt semi-opaque by reducing the layer opacity, you can see through to some of the checkered pattern. This pattern allows you to see which areas are fully transparent and which areas are semi-opaque. If I want there to be a background fill, then I can add a background layer or show the canvas layer. I'll revert Layers Dude. The second purpose of the canvas layer is to function as your default canvas color. This is the color you might get when you erase or clear all layers. When you flatten your image into a single layer, it will usually become the canvas layer. But in Rebelle, the canvas layer is isolated from all of the other layers. Next, we will look at how to group layers together. This can be useful for organizing your layers and for transforming multiple layers at once. I'll hold Shift and select all three ball layers. If you want to select non-contiguous layers, then you can hold down Control and click to select individual layers rather than a range of layers. Next, I will group these layers together by clicking on the Group Layers button at the bottom of the Layers panel, or I could use the shortcut of Ctrl-G. I'll name that group Balls, and I could use Transform to move that group around. If we don't want the balls to be in front of Layers Dude, we can drag the group down beneath the body. Now the balls are behind him. I can open up the group by clicking the triangle, and then I will be able to select and move each layer individually. I can also show and hide the individual layers, or I can show and hide the entire group. Observe how the visibility state of each layer is preserved when I show and hide the entire group. I can transform all of the layers in the group with Transform, and now those layers can be modified together. And if I want to remove multiple layers at once, I'll just select the group and delete it. I'll revert Layers Dude. It might also be possible to create groups within groups. For example, I will group my balls together, and then group both groups. Now if I open up that group, you can see the groups are nested together nicely. Within the primary group are subgroups which contain all of the individual layers. The layer names are usually indented a bit to indicate the different levels of subgroups. There might even be colored labels separating them. Ungrouping layers will separate them into individual layers again. You can do this by selecting a group and using the shortcut to ungroup. This varies between art applications, but sometimes it is Ctrl-Shift-G. You can always look up the shortcuts for your specific art application in the menu bar at the top, or the menu for customizing the keyboard shortcuts. Next, let's explore how we can duplicate layers and groups. This can be very helpful if you want to create objects that repeat throughout your painting. I'll select just the blue ball layer. One way I can duplicate this layer is to click on the Duplicate Layer button if there is one in the Layers panel. You can find this in the Layers menu as well. Now I have two blue ball layers, and I can move one of them using Transform. I'll select the red ball. Another way to duplicate a layer is to perform a Select All and then copy and paste. That creates a duplicate above the selected layer, If I don't want all of the objects to look the same, I can transform some of them to make them larger or smaller. You can also duplicate groups of layers. I'll group the balls I duplicated, and then I will duplicate that group. This gives me two independent groups that I can move around and rearrange. This can be helpful when you want to duplicate many objects at once. I can select both of the groups and duplicate those as well. If I continue to do this, I can quickly create a lot of layers. Within each of those groups, I can transform or move around each of those objects independently to make it look less repetitive. When you're done, you can merge those layers together into a single layer. This technique works well for creating stars, snowflakes, and other types of repeating objects. I've reverted layers, dude, and I'm going to create a new layer above the head, which I will name frames. I'll create one more layer and I'll call it lenses. I'll move the frames layer above the lenses because the lenses would be getting covered up by the frames. If you already know the subject that you're going to be painting, it can be helpful to create layers ahead of time before you apply any paint to the canvas. By creating the layers first, you can focus on painting without as many interruptions. It can also be helpful to visualize the layer order. For instance, if I were creating a landscape, I'd create layers for the sky, clouds, mountains, grass, and trees. For a portrait, I might have layers for the face, eyes, nose, mouth, and hair. You don't need to determine every single layer ahead of time, just create some of the obvious ones, and then add more layers as you're painting. With the frames layer selected, I'll choose a magenta color. Then I'll use a fully opaque hard edge brush to draw in a couple of circles. I'll connect them together and add lines on the outer edges to complete the frames. Next, I'll go to the lenses layer, I'll select an orange color, and I'll fill the lenses, making sure not to go outside the frames. I don't intend for the glasses to remain this color. I chose these colors because they have enough contrast to show up well on top of the colors that are underneath them. That helps me see what I'm drawing more clearly. Plus, you might not know which color you want the object to be yet, but if you know the shape, you might as well put it in. The color can be decided later. If I want the frames to be brown, I can select the frames layer, lock the layer transparency, select brown, and then fill the layer. I'll select the lenses layer, and let's take a look at layer opacity. If I want the lenses to be a little bit transparent so I can see through to the eyes, I can use the opacity slider to make the layer more transparent. This gives me peach-tinted lenses, but the opaque paint doesn't look right. It would look more convincing if the layers could tint the colors underneath. So I will change the layer blending mode to multiply. Now you can see that it darkens the eyes. I can adjust the strength of the tinting by moving the opacity slider. There are other layer blending modes that could be useful, but I'll recommend that you watch my reference video to learn more. Those were the basics of working with layers in your digital art application. There's a lot more you can do with layers, so be sure to check out some of my other tutorials to learn more.